Doing something completely ordinary, making tea, driving to the supermarket, lying in bed, you're almost asleep, and then a thought appears out of nowhere that's so dark or disturbing or completely at odds with who you think you are that you actually freeze for a second. What was that? Why would I think that? What does that say about me? And then because you're the kind of person who takes things seriously, you just don't let it go. You poke at it. You hold it up to the light. You examine it. You try to figure out where it came from. And then you're wondering quietly and maybe with a bit of a sinking feeling whether it means something terrible about you. That right there is the thing I want to talk about today, not the thought itself, but what you do with it next. So intrusive thoughts are one of those things that almost nobody talks about honestly, which means most people who have them think they're the only person that has them, but they're not. Research suggests that around 90% of people experience intrusive thoughts regularly. 90%. So the thought that swooped in and horrified you this morning, statistically, hundreds of thousands of people had a version of it today too. So they come in a few flavors. Sometimes they're violent, a sudden image of something terrible happening to someone you love or yourself doing something you never do. Sometimes they're sexual and completely things that you don't want. Sometimes they're blasphemous, or they show up as a fear that you said something awful and then you didn't realize, or that you left the stove on and the house is burning, or that you're secretly a bad person underneath all the effort that you put in to being a good one. The content varies, but the structure is always the same. A thought arrives that feels wrong, and then you react to it as if it's evidence of something. It's that reaction, not the thought, that creates the suffering. So I want to tell you about a woman I worked with quite a few years ago. Let's call her Ruth. That's not her name. She was in her late 50s. She was a retired teacher, really warm, the kind of person that her grandchildren adored and her friends leaned on. And by any measure, she was one of the gentlest people I'd ever met. And Ruth came to me in a state of kind of quiet terror, because for several months she'd been having these intrusive thoughts about her grandchildren. Not loving thoughts, disturbing ones, like images she didn't want, images she hadn't asked for, and she'd never told anyone. And she'd started avoiding being alone with the kids just in case. Though, in the case of what, she couldn't even say because she knew she would never ever harm them. But the thoughts kept coming. And every time they did, she took it as proof that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with her. So she'd spent months in this kind of private hell. She was completely alone with it. And she was convinced that she was a monster hiding inside her grandmother's cardigan. And when I explained to Ruth what intrusive thoughts actually are, I remember her starting to cry. Not sad crying, but relief crying. The kind of crying that happens when you've been holding your breath for a very long time and somebody finally tells you that it's okay to exhale. Now, here's what I told her, and here's what I want to tell you. Your brain is a prediction machine. So its entire job, evolutionarily speaking, is to keep you alive by anticipating threats. And one of the ways that it does that is by running simulations, including worst case simulations of things that could go wrong. So this isn't a malfunction. This is your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. So intrusive thoughts are in a large part your brain's threat detection system. It's just misfiring slightly. So it's generating scenarios, including terrible ones, not because you want them or because they reflect your values or your desires, but because that's part of how your brain scans for danger. So think of it like a security system that occasionally goes off when a moth flies past the sensor. The alarm's real, the threat isn't. And in fact, and this is the part I really want you to hear, research in cognitive behavioral therapy has consistently shown that the people who are most disturbed by intrusive thoughts are often the people with the strongest moral compass. So the thought about harming someone horrifies you precisely because you would never ever want to harm them. The gap between the thought and your actual values is what creates the distress. So people without empathy or conscience, they don't lie awake agonizing over their intrusive thoughts. You do, which tells you something important about who you actually are. So if the thoughts themselves aren't the problem, what is? The problem is something psychologists call thought-action fusion. So it's this unconscious belief that having a thought is the same as wanting to do the thing, or that having the thought makes it more likely to happen. So it's the feeling that thinking something bad makes you bad, that the thought is a window into your true self, your hidden nature, your real desires. But it isn't. A thought's a thought. It's a firing of neurons. It's weather passing through. It's not a confession, and it's not a forecast. The other thing that amplifies intrusive thoughts, and this one is so counterintuitive that it took me a long time to really trust it, is trying to suppress them. So there's this famous experiment by a psychologist called David Wagner where he told participants not to think about a white bear. All right? Just don't think about one. And of course, they couldn't stop thinking about one. So the instruction to suppress a thought puts that thought in a spotlight, and your brain starts monitoring for it, which means it keeps finding it. So every time you tell yourself, don't think about this, stop thinking about this, why am I thinking about this? You're literally, essentially placing a neon sign around the thought and giving it a second job. So now it has to be the thing you're also trying not to think about. So you've doubled its presence in your mind. So fighting the thought doesn't make it leave, just makes it louder. So you're going to ask me what actually works. The answer, when you first hear it, sounds almost too simple. You stop fighting the thought. So you let it be there, not because you agree with it or endorse it or because you're going to act on it, but because arguing with it is what's keeping it alive. So there's this technique that comes out of the acceptance and commitment therapy. It's called ACT, right? Or ACT. It involves something called defusion. So the idea is to create a little distance between you and the thought. So instead of the thought being something that's happening inside you, you learn to see it as something that's passing through you, like a train through a station. Pulls in, makes a noise, it leaves. You don't have to get on that train. So one small practice is this. When a disturbing thought arrives, instead of grabbing it or fighting it, you simply notice it. You even name it. There's that intrusive thought again, or my brain's doing the thing. You're stepping back slightly from inside the thought to the observer of the thought. And that tiny shift from I'm thinking this to I'm noticing a thought changes the relationship you have with it completely. You're not the thought. You're the one who notices it. So this isn't about any kind of bypassing or pretending that the thought didn't happen. And it's not about treating the thought as a verdict. It came in, right? You noticed it. It's going to pass. Your job isn't to engage with it. Your job isn't to analyze it. Your job isn't to convince yourself you're not a terrible person for having had it. Your job is to just let it move through. Now, I also want to say something about the middle of the night because that's often when these thoughts are worse. And there's a reason for that. So when we're tired, the prefrontal cortex, that's the part of the brain that handles rational assessment and emotional regulation, it's running on low. And the emotional threat detection parts of the brain get louder when the rational part gets quieter. So at 3 a.m., the thought you managed to set aside at lunchtime feels enormous, it feels true, it feels permanent. But it isn't. It's a tired brain in the dark, that's all. So if you wake up with one of these thoughts, the most useful thing you can do is not engage with it. Don't try and solve it. Don't reassure yourself you're not a bad person, because reassurance seeking actually reinforces the anxiety loop, not the other way around. Just notice it's there. Let it sit. Redirect your attention. Go to your breath. Go to the feeling of the sheets, the sound of the house. Go and listen to one of my many sleep meditations on YouTube. Not to escape the thought, but to stop feeding it. So here's your experiment for the week. The next time an intrusive thought shows up, and it will, I want you to try something different from what you usually do. So instead of grabbing it, analyzing it, or trying to push it away, just say to yourself, quietly, without any drama, I'm having the thought that ... and finish the sentence with whatever the thought was. I'm having the thought that something terrible is going to happen. I'm having the thought that I'm a bad person. I'm having the thought that I could do something harmful. I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. Right? That small linguistic shift of I'm having the thought that does something real. It puts you on the outside of the thought instead of inside it. You're not the thought. You're the person observing it. And from that position, it's got a lot less power. So you don't need to do anything else. Just that. Notice it. Name it with that phrase. Let it be. All right? If this episode resonated with you, especially if you've been carrying some version of what Ruth was carrying, I'd love for you to take the happiness quiz. It takes a few minutes. It's free. You get a personalized PDF showing you where you're at. The link is in the notes. So the thought that disturbs you the most is often the one that matters least. It's not a window into your soul. It's just weather. And you're not the storm. You're the sky that all of it passes through. I hope this has been helpful. As always, be kind, take care, go gently in the world.